Hi, how you doing? Yeah, I heard you guys. We're doing the creepypasta slash grimdark, all that video. Before we dive into the nitty gritty of My Little Pony creepypastas, I should probably explain for anyone who doesn't know what a creepypasta actually is. Creepypastas originate from those chainmail messages that were a thing in the earlier days of the internet. They'd say things like, if you read this, you're cursed. Send this to 10 people to move the curse onto them, or something like that. And sometimes they would have an actual message, like the Carmen Winston message, which is very famous. You probably heard of it. And these were nicknamed copypasta, after copy-paste. These evolved into the poorly written, tropey stories we know and love called creepypastas. Some My Little Pony creepypastas are actually somewhat well known, and the ones we're doing in today's video are going to be unobjectively some of the most popular ones. If you don't think so, that's fine. I can't guarantee they're the most popular, but they're just the ones that I think of when you say the word MLP creepypasta. I'll be covering Cupcakes, Rainbow Factory, Lil Miss Rarity, An Apple Sleep Experiment, and Rocket to Insanity. If there is a creepypasta you like and would like me to cover in a potential sequel, let me know in the comments. Now that's all out of the way, on to the pastas. Cupcakes, the classic. If you're at all familiar with the My Little Pony fandom, you will have probably heard Cupcakes mentioned before. Whether you actually know what it is, I can't guarantee, but it's still famous. Cupcakes was written in 2011 by a person called Drekka Jones under the name Sergeant Sprinkles, and it's one of the first, if not the first, My Little Pony creepypasta. It sets a slightly annoying trope for them, where they're basically just trying to be as gory and who'd actually write that as possible, and I think it's kind of dumb. For me, stories that are intelligently written with suspense and tension are much more effective than blood, guts, and more blood. Tangent over. Briefly summarizing the story, Pinkie Pie invites Rainbow Dash over to Sugar Cube Corner to bake cupcakes, but in a gasp turn of events, she knocks out Dashie, and when she regains consciousness, she's on an operating table, with Pinkie standing over her with a saw. And Pinkie Pie harvests all of good old Artie's organs to use in her cupcakes. Sounds stupid, I know, and it kinda is, but it has the charm that old creepypastas have. But even that doesn't excuse the many spelling mistakes that are present and the cheesy jokes that completely take me out of the story. Now I get Pinkie Pie's element of harmony is laughter, but seriously, the jokes in this are just stupid. Like, they don't make it feel like Pinkie Pie, they just take me out. I know, it sounds like I've been really negative about this pasta, and I have. But that doesn't mean I don't like it. It's the first My Little Pony creepypasta I ever read. So I'll always hold a special place in my heart. But that doesn't mean I can't point out stuff that I don't like about it. A lot of people's first encounter with Cupcakes was the famous animation by Mr. Davy. That's pretty short and easier to get through than the whole pasta, I'll tell you that. Oh, before we move on, I nearly forgot. One of the most recognizable things about the Cupcake story is the cloak Pinkie wears. It's made of Pony's cutie marks sewn together to sort of become the icon. It's one of the icons of Cupcakes. And if you Google My Little Pony Cupcake creepypasta, you'll get a lot of pictures of Pinkie in this cloak, and many people will be surprised to find out that the cloak doesn't actually appear in the original pasta, but was added in a fan sequel or artwork. I don't know exactly where. On to Rainbow Factory. Probably the most famous creepypasta after Cupcakes, and it's about my favourite pony. Hurrah! A bit of trivia to start. Rainbow Factory actually started off as a music video that was a submission to a music competition about where rainbows come from in Equestria, I believe. And the song suggests that rainbows are made from other ponies. Naturally, someone wants to expand on that story, and that person ended up being Aurora Dawn. Rainbow Factory starts as a flight school where the characters to remember are Aurora Dawn's insert, Scootaloo, and this other colt who fails flight school, but no one really cares about him. Basically, the story is they all fail their flight tests and are taken to the Rainbow Factory, where they find out that the rainbows are not what they seem. Rainbow Dash is the leader of the Rainbow Factory and tries to and succeeds in killing 2 out of the 3 young ponies that failed their flying tests, and is expected to have killed Scootaloo at the end, but isn't actually written to, as it ends with Scoot being cornered and giving up hope. Rainbow Factory had a lot of unofficial sequels, as a lot of creepypastas did, but none of them ended up being nearly as famous as the original. Now, my personal opinion on the pasta, it's pretty good. Not perfect, however, and I feel like the author glazes their OC a little too much, with her describing her flight performance as expert 3 times in detail, yet somehow failing due to a broken wing, or something that wouldn't even normally cause someone to fail a physical test, as it wasn't her fault. But yeah, it's not as bad as other pastas, but fails to build much suspense or really bring any feelings of dread and unease. Which are really some of the hardest things for a person to feel when reading something, but if you can get someone to feel them, it's really impactful. Rainbow Factory potentially got referenced in the actual show, as this audio sounds quite similar to the intro to Rainbow Factory, the music video. However, this could just be a coincidence. When it comes to famous animation / art, a lot of people hold the misconception that Rainbow Factory the song was made about the pasta, which I already cleared up before, so it does not count as animation / art. And when you look up pictures for Rainbow Factory, the famous one you get is this, and for me, this is what I imagine when you mention the pasta. To summarise, I quite like this creepypasta, although it isn't the best ever. Lil Miss Rarity. Ooh. If you know this one, you know it's gonna get weird. I'm not gonna go too into detail, but Lil Miss Rarity gets very weird. It's a blog written by Tom Artista, and is about how Rarity is a masochist, and gets pleasure out of hurting herself. At least I think that's what it's about. To be honest, it's very confusing. The character designs are like anthropomorphic, sexualized versions of the characters, so it seems that some part of the pasta is coming from the writer's own fantasies. Now, ignoring the weird character designs, I do quite like the artwork, because the monotone colours make the story feel claustrophobic, if that makes sense. Like, despite the story taking place in Ponyville, it feels like it only happens in one room, and the artwork definitely does bring an unsettling feeling to the blog. Which, as I mentioned before, is quite hard to do, although I guess it doesn't count since this blog uses artwork. Still, it's effective. Now, while the story started off somewhat contained, later on demons and all that kind of stuff start appearing, and it gets very weird very quick. Lil Miss Rarity has a reputation for being kinky, and I'm not going to deny that. I'm not the biggest fan of this pasta for reasons I've mentioned enough already. I mean, if you're into that kind of thing, then be my guest and read it, but for the average reader, it's not going to be that enjoyable. Lil Miss Rarity does actually have a famous animation of the entire series that I'm showing in the background, and if you want to check out the story, you should watch the animation, because it's much easier to watch, because, as I mentioned before, the whole thing's written in blog, and it can be kind of confusing to navigate throughout the entire story. You have to find all the blog posts and all that, so if you want to check out the story, watch the animation. It has the same art style and gives off the same claustrophobic feel. In summary, I couldn't say the pasta is unentertaining, as it's kind of funny to see what manner of crazy things will happen next, but depending on how you feel about certain themes could be disturbing and you might want to avoid it. I know, you see the name Apple Sleep Experiment and you assume it's a rewrite of the Russian Sleep Experiment. But it's actually more than that, and it fits quite well into the My Little Pony lore, apart from the part where Filthy Rich is a loan shark. It was written by Magpie Pony, and the basic story breakdown is, Granny Smith owes Filthy Rich like 400 jars of Zap Apple Jam, so Applejack needs to do a lot of work, and doesn't have time to sleep, so Twilight gives her a potion that will keep her awake for 24 hours. However, it doesn't stop after 24 hours, and long story short, she hallucinates everyone as Filthy Rich and kills a bunch of ponies. It was very summarised, and if it sounds bad, that's probably why, because I think this pasta is quite good compared to some other ones. I feel like it fits characters quite well. It makes sense that Applejack would work really hard to the point where she'd be desperate enough to drink an experimental potion. I'd recommend reading it, honestly. Twilight's kind of the secondary antagonist / main antagonist, as she refuses to take any responsibility for the things Applejack did, which is kind of her fault for letting Applejack drink the potion. She tries to gaslight her into believing that the potion never existed to protect her reputation. Twilight then puts Applejack in a cell in Canterlot prison, so she isn't really likeable in this. As is with the other pastas, there are many sequels, but none are nearly as good as the original. While there aren't any famous animations or anything about it, there is a pretty good reading by the lost narrator, so check that out if you don't want to read it yourself like me. To summarise, An Apple Sleep Experiment is, in my opinion, the best one we've had so far due to it being more in line with the actual shown characters in the show, and being more believable as an event that could actually happen in an alternate timeline. On to the final pasta, Rocket to Insanity. Quite an interesting pasta that could be considered a sequel to Cupcakes, but I'm including it as its own thing. Basically, Rainbow Dash has a recurring nightmare about the events of Cupcakes. In this universe, Cupcakes isn't real and Pinkie Pie is a normal pony. Due to these nightmares, Dashy slowly goes insane and ends up killing Pinkie Pie, so kinda reverse Cupcakesing her. There's a bit more to it than that, but that's the basic gist of the story. This story actually had a lot of alternate endings, about 20 I think, which I don't really want to dive into right now, maybe in a follow-up video. Rocket to Insanity is a pretty interesting take on a classic pasta, although it isn't the best Rainbow Dash creepypasta. I don't think much will beat Rainbow Factory in terms of fame and all that. I think this is a better way of doing Cupcakes and a more realistic kind of event setup. Dashy only killed Pinkie because it seemed to her like the events of the dream were happening in real life, instead of her wanting to make cupcakes out of Pinkie's body. Well, that's gonna have to do it for today's episode. I'm aware there are other famous creepypastas, grimdarks, fanfictions, whatever, that I didn't mention in today's video, but I intend to make a follow-up of this video where I go through some more stories. If you guys want to see a longer deep dive style video, then let me know as well. If you enjoyed, please consider liking, subbing and all that stuff. And with that, I've been Monodash and I'll see you sometime soon.